Hi everyone, it's great to see you. I am Dr. Natasha Feinberg. I am an Associate Professor of Literacy at Rhode Island College, and I direct the Masters of Reading program there. So my research focuses on how best to teach reading and how children learn to read. And I know that parents and caregivers and teachers, we all want to give the best books to our new readers and get them to love reading, and we want them to be very proficient readers. And boy, we wish we could just give them a nice big fat book and say, go to it, this is wonderful, and have them able to read it no problem. But the truth is, when they're beginner readers, we have to provide some scaffolded text for them. We don't give them the hardest things right up front, but we want to give them the readings that they can do that are going to turn them into really good readers and are going to make them want to continue reading. And there are 3 different types of books that you can give a beginning reader in order to provide that scaffolded support and that opportunity to practice new skills. And today I'm going to talk about those 3 different types of texts, and I'm going to tell you the pros and cons for each of them. I'll let you know what the research tells us about those types of texts, and then you can make the decision on what you feel will be best for your students. So the first type of text I'm going to talk about are the decodable text. Now, decodable means you can figure out the words in that text by sounding them out. If something is decodable, there's a strong letter sound correspondence, and usually we're looking for systematic patterns in the English language. And we explicitly teach those to students. Now, we know with the science of reading that explicit systematic phonics instruction is really important to beginning readers. So we teach them, this is the sound that short A makes, and then let's look at a bunch of words with short A in it. So it only makes sense then that we would give them some books to read that have a bunch of short A words in them. And if we've taught them 5 different letters and the sounds that those letters make, we're going to try to give them reading that has those letters in it so they can practice it. Now, the research does tell us that it is beneficial for students to apply those rules that they're learning in phonics to written text, and that even better than doing it one single word at a time is to have connected text like you would have in a book. So we have our decodable books. I have a couple decodable books in front of me here. Here is one, Stop the Tot. And probably right there from that title, you can tell what skill this decodable text is focusing on. I have the short O sounds here. I'm noticing there's a lot of letter T's in here. And a lot of these decodable text, it's great. They even have something in the beginning or at the end that tells you what the focus is. So if I just knew my child learned short O this week, this might be a great book to have them read to me. Is the tot in the pot? Yes, I see the tot. The tot is in the pot. Well, you might have noticed something right away about this. One of the cons of your decodable texts is that sometimes the stories are a little silly, like there's a tot in the pot. And you probably think back, you've seen lots of books like this where Tat, the fat cat, sat on the flat mat, and there's only so many times you can read about the fat cat sitting on the mat. But it does its job, and the beneficial part of that is kids can feel really empowered. They've learned these rules. They can apply it and they can figure out those words. They can read this whole book. And if they come to a word they don't know, they have enough skills so far to sound that word out. So you know with decodable text that you are reinforcing the skills that are being taught in the phonics program. You are following the science of reading with that explicit and systematic phonics instruction. We are empowering students to look at the words, and this is so key. One of the greatest benefits of decodable text is that kids are reminded that the answer, the clues to what an unknown word is is in the letters. So if they don't know what that word is, they look carefully at those letters and they recall the sounds that are linked to those letters and they figure it out. So they're looking at the words, the letters. That is a skill, a strategy for figuring out unknown words that they're going to use the rest of their life. We know from the research that these strategies that they practice, even at this very, very beginning reader stage, are the ones that they return to. When they come across something difficult, when they are given a harder text, they will look at those letters, sound out the words, and use the knowledge they have to put those sounds together to create words. So, our con, you get some kind of interesting stories here. You really don't have much of a storyline usually, so they're kind of shallow stories. They are minimal in the word selection because your beginning readers just don't have that many words they can sound out yet. Positive, they are getting a lot of explicit practice and application of those skills that they have been taught. They are practicing a strategy that they can come back to again and again throughout their life with harder books. And they get to work on their orthographic mapping in the brain. So orthographic mapping is a term that you're going to hear for beginning readers a lot. When your brain orthographically maps words onto it, it is looking at word patterns, word pieces, and seeing them again and again and building these synapses in the brain that allow it so later on, when you're shown a much more difficult word, it seems instantaneous that your brain recognizes all those little word parts and seems to just put it together and you know that word. Thank goodness, right? You don't have to sit there and sound out every single word in a book because you've seen them so many times. A good decodable text is going to do exactly that. You are going to see the text again and again, and we are starting to make those orthographically mapped connections in the brain. The second type of text that you see a lot is controlled vocabulary. So controlled vocabulary means exactly what it says, that we are only going to put a certain number of words in the text. A lot of them are going to be decodable. Some of them aren't, but usually we start with like 1 or 2 words and we start building up. And this is more of a memorization type approach. A great example of this are Dick and Jane books. So Dick and Jane books usually start with 1 word on the first page, spot. And you go to the next one. Here's Spot. Here's Spot. Look here. So there we go. We can tell it is controlled vocabulary. We know spot, we know here, and we know look. And then we keep going. Jump, Spot. Jump, jump. Oh, Spot. So you're building up from 1 word. We add a little bit more, and we're repetitively looking at those words. And so this also helps with the orthographic mapping, but it's more of a look at the whole word. And notice that like here, is not really a decodable word in completion. There are parts of it that are decodable. So it's a slightly different approach, and yet I learned from Dick and Jane. Many people really like that. Here's a little small book here called Beeper and Honk. Beeper and Honk drive bumper cars. Those are some pretty long words in there for a beginner reader. Honk bumps Beeper. Beeper bumps Honk. Honk bumps Beeper again. Beeper bumps Honk again. Honk, honk, says Honk. Beep, beep, says Beeper. Bump me again, they shout. So you can see there's that repetitive nature. It has a little bit more of a storyline to it. A lot of times, your controlled vocabulary also includes those words that you see most commonly in our language. The, here. We call those frequent words our fry words, F-R-Y, named after a person. Sometimes it's a Dolch list of words. The fry words, take all the words in the English language and number them in order of frequency. So your first 100 fry words are the most frequent 100 words you're going to see in print. And you know what? It makes up a very large percentage of what we read. So having those frequently seen words is certainly very beneficial to students because they're going to be words that are seen again and again. So we have our decodables where you can figure out phonetically those words. We have our controlled vocabulary text. The third type of text that we often see are commonly called predictable text. So, well, you'll see what I mean when I read this to you. Here's a little book. This is a predictable textbook. It's called Colors, Colors. The flower is red. The sun is yellow. The frog is green. The plum is purple. The bird is blue. The carrot is orange. You get the idea. And then there's a book that is super, super well known, Brown Bear, Brown Bear. You probably read this as a child yourself, and I have it here. So on the first page, Brown Bear, what do you see? I see a red bird looking at me. Red bird, what do you see? I see a yellow duck looking at me. Yellow duck, what do you see? I see a blue horse looking at me. Predictable text. And you can see why. There's a pattern there. Now, this type of text is often most appealing to adults and a lot of times to children too, because let's face it, it often has that beautiful sense of rhythm that we're looking for. So we call that prosody in fluency, where you have expression and you have a fluent pace and the words are set up in the English language to flow. We love how that sounds. And if I'm a parent sitting there and I have two to choose, the cat sat on the mat, or brown bear, what do you see? Well, let's face it, brown bear just sounds a lot nicer. And kids get a real reward from predictable text in that they often can go through and read that whole book. Now, I have to say they read that whole book because the truth is with the predictable text, a lot of times you don't really have to look at the words. If I look at this picture, the flower is red. And if I cover up this sentence, you can just look at this picture and say, the sun is yellow. And you could go through this whole book not looking at the words. Now, that's where it starts to get dangerous because you don't read with explicit pictures like this all the books all the way through college. So when you take away the pictures, a lot of times students are lost because they've been practicing the strategy of looking at pictures to help them out. And without the pictures, I have seen kids, they look up at the ceiling, they're looking around and you why are you looking at the ceiling? I'm figuring out what it says. Well, the answer is not on the ceiling. The answer is in the words, where you need to be looking to decode and figure out what the word says. So remember with our decodable text, the strategy of looking at the word, figuring out what sounds go with those letters, that's a really good strategy. Looking at the pictures, not a really good reading strategy. But the predictable text is very enjoyable, and you are building up that rhythm of language, that love of language, and perhaps getting into more vocabulary development there also. We know that in the theoretical framework, the simple view of reading, that decoding or word recognition is half of the battle, and half of the battle is language comprehension and recognizing that advanced vocabulary, learning what those words mean, understanding what you read. So you need both. So here I have 3 different types of books: the decodables, the predictable text, the controlled vocabulary. Let's talk about what the research tells us. So there's been not as much research done on this as you would think that there should be. Tim Shanahan is a wonderful educator, researcher, and has some great articles on this and breaks down these 3 types of texts and points out to us that there are these positives in all of them and there's some negatives in all of them. And he really encourages us to look at all 3 for their benefits, and the research that he has done and cites says that the best books for your children are all of them. That you should be giving a good diet to your beginning readers of all 3 types of books. For your beginning readers, you probably are going heavily on your phonetically decodable books. And he says, the predictable texts are probably the ones you want to pull back from. So maybe once a week, you're adding that into your teaching instruction with a heavier dose of the other pieces. Now, there's a really good article out there by Pugh, Kearns, and Hebert. I'll put the link to this below, and if you're in one of my classes and watching this because I've assigned it to you, you're going to get to read this. In this research article, they have collected a whole bunch of other research from other people and put it together. And in that, one of the points that they make is that, like a decodable text, that's kind of a term that we throw around loosely. There is no set and fast rule for what a decodable text is. In fact, states make their own laws on what constitutes a decodable text. If you go to California, 75% of the words have to be decodable in the book, and then we can call it a decodable text. If you go to Texas, 80% of the words have to be decodable to call it a decodable text. So it differs just depending on what state you're in. So in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, well, decodable text, let's just think of that overall. Most of the words I can decode and figure out phonetically. This article then goes on to talk about how if you stick to just one type of text, you're practicing that one type of strategy, and if the student runs into something that doesn't fit, so if they're reading decodable and they get a word that isn't decodable, they might not know what to do. And if they're reading a predictable text, they might not know a word, and instead of using their phonics skills to figure it out, they start looking all around or looking for other pictures to help them. So in this study, they also agree that by combining all 3 elements, you're exposing students to multiple strategies. We are keeping decodables at the forefront, and then I would say controlled vocabulary also, because you're making those brain connections and orthographic mapping. But we also have to make sure that our students have the joy of reading a full book through, of hearing English language with that prosody that we want them to read with also. So with the science of reading, we want to make sure that as teachers in the classroom, we are emphasizing the decodable texts and the controlled vocabulary texts that allow students to really practice that systematic and explicit phonics instruction we are providing in the kindergarten, first, second grades. It gives students that time to apply those skills, and it lets them practice the strategy that we want them to come back to again and again. Look at those letters and figure out the alphabetic code that's in front of you. So we've really moved away from predictable text. Like I said, predictable text does give students the chance to read a book maybe they wouldn't be able to otherwise and have that sense of success. It does allow us to have some of the beauty of the English language and rhythm there. But when you're coming back to the lessons that we're teaching to build skills from the basic building blocks of how to read a word on up, we really do want students practicing with the decodable and that controlled vocabulary text. Now there's one more type of text here that I didn't show you, and that's because that's the picture books that we read to our children. And there's probably a whole bunch sitting around your house or your classroom, and we love those picture books. I'm going to grab one. Lots of you probably recognize this book, Make Way for Ducklings. It's an award winner, and oh, it is just such a lovely book. This is the type of book that as teachers and parents and caregivers, we read to our kids. When we actually look at the level of reading in a book like this, usually it's like 3rd or 4th grade level at least. So this is a time where you're sitting beside your child, you're reading to them, and you're reinforcing print concepts. But this book isn't there to scaffold their beginning reader abilities. So just looking at this one page, after Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water, or to have her lunch, or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there. Notice the complexity of that sentence. That 2 sentences in this one paragraph, they're long sentences. They have clauses separated by commas. They read smoothly. We're introducing more vocabulary here with this rich text. So you're reading this out loud. This is where the language comprehension piece comes in, because your children understand a lot more than they have the ability to read when they're just beginner readers. So this allows them to access that comprehension and vocabulary piece, but you're doing the reading for them. And of course, for our beginning readers, you're reinforcing those print concepts like opening a book, moving left to right, starting at the top of the page and moving down, all really important. So when you think back about those 3 types of text to give your beginning readers, those are usually the types of texts that we're looking at through to the end of 1st grade. Ideally, by the end of 1st grade, your students pretty much have a hold on a lot of the basic phonics concepts. Now, good phonics instruction will continue throughout 2nd grade with that explicit, systematic instruction as we focus on more of the intricacies of phonics instruction. Dr. Devin Kearns and I have a book chapter coming out this next year where we talk about the brain's statistical learning. So as we're making those orthographic mapped pathways in our brain, the brain actually statistically is looking at word patterns and memorizing those word patterns, those that occur most frequently, and recognizing those that don't occur as frequently, so that when you get to a new word, your brain knows it's most likely going to be pronounced this way. But if that doesn't work, here statistically are other possibilities, and it's absolutely amazing how the mind can do that. As students get into 2nd and into 3rd grade, they're starting to look at those phonics rules that are statistically less likely to occur, but still significant enough that we want to teach them to students so that when they encounter a difficult word, they have those options also orthographically mapped in their mind. What does this mean for you? Oh, it means that it is tough to choose the right books for your children, but you also know your kids. So give them a good selection of books that you feel are going to support the skills they have. Also give them a selection of books that fit their interest. We know those students out there that love dinosaurs and can read every single dinosaur name in the book there. And that is absolutely fine too. But practice and exposure to those words are so, so important. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.